Welcome here to our session talking about 2030 and beyond. And if you look at the instruction or look at the description, we said 2030 and beyond here, and then we said 2035, and we've referenced 2050. That's not typos, it's intentional. What we want to talk about today is set the premise that we've arrived. Broadband is everywhere. Middle mile's done. We have broadband to all of our schools, all of our institutions, all of our libraries, hospitals, universities. What will it look like? And we're also setting the precedence that it's a positive future. We're not looking at, it could go the other way, but we're choosing that thing. My name is Geoff. I'm the one who was, this is what happens when you're on the program committee. You're like, wouldn't it be fun to think about the future? And they're like, yeah, Geoff, why don't you do that? So luckily, I've invited these folks who are here today, and I'll let them introduce themselves real quick. And we're just going to have a conversation and think about it. And if we have time, we want to turn the conversation to you so you all can get together and talk about it and then share what you think the future might look like. So I will let the rest of the panel introduce themselves real quick.
I'll take this.
There you go.
I'm Rowland Baker. Was deputy superintendent in Santa Cruz County Office of Education, was a principal before that in a couple of different schools, teacher for 18 years. And I guess I have IT in my veins, and I love Cenic. It's one of the great organizations I found out about in the 90s. So.
And my name is Jeffrey Weekley. I'm a fairly well-known commodity around here.
And Andy spells his name correctly, apparently.
Yeah, the name is correctly, but the Director of Research Computing or Research IT at UC Santa Cruz. And when people ask me, where do I live? I say, I live in California. I live in the future. So that's kind of the spirit that we want to bring to this panel.
Hi, I'm Mike Lawrence. I'm Director of IT at ABC Unified School District. Yes, it's a real district. It's not dummy data in your database. It's in Cerritos. It covers Artesia and several other cities in Southern California and LA County. Before that, I met many folks that I've run into here at this conference, including Rowland and Geoff, in my capacity as CEO of a nonprofit ed tech organization called CUE, which once stood for Computer Using Educators. And now that all of them are, they're changing the name. So in any case, glad to be here, thrilled to be on this panel, and I'll hand it off.
Matt Rantanen, let's see, reading what's up there, let's just add co-founder of the Tribal Broadband Boot Camps, effectively supporting Native American communities to get to 2030 and beyond.
And I did put that on there. I think it just didn't fit. Sorry, Matt. Sorry. Well, let's jump in. As I said, the middle mile is built, last mile is done. If bandwidth were unlimited in our schools, at home, at everywhere around, in every one of the tribal communities, what would be possible? What could schools actually do? And I will just I'm not going to go any order. Y'all can jump in with whoever wants to go first.
Well, I think as we were talking about what we were going to talk about, I like to think of this as if we look towards science fiction for what the future might hold for us, we have two very popular large tentpole properties. One of them is Star Trek, where there's a world of abundance and where justice prevails. It's a multicultural, multi-species galaxy that we live in, not without its peril, but still, it's sort of a future that has a positive view of what we might expect. And on the other hand, we have Star Wars, which we know happened in a galaxy far, far away, and it was a long time ago, but to us, it's really a statement about the future, where there's conflict and fascism, and technology is used to oppress. And I think those two themes are reflected in the popular understanding of what AI is today, right? Do we have a future of abundance, or do we have a future that is dystopic? I choose abundance. I choose a future that unlocks human potential and makes more possible for more people.
You know, I would just like to say there's a lot of commonalities when you start talking about AI, and I've been around long enough to see the cycle of learning repeat itself. And when we had computers first coming into the schools, and I was really hot on that, let's go get it, we had teachers that are saying, I'm not going to do that. You're not bringing a computer into my classroom. And we realized at that point there was a big fear factor. And so Mike in his session today was talking about what they're doing to help get rid of that with AI. They're having community outreach, parent programs, having them actually use AI, get their hands on it. And I don't see, in this collaborative vision for digital future, I think we need to coordinate, collaborate, and look back about those cycles we went through with all the other technologies coming around. I mean, it was just 5 years ago, we were still with the Department of Ed trying to fight on what are 21st century skills, So we need to open our broadband to make sure we're encompassing everybody that's there, and so they understand and don't sabotage.
Well, I think I agree with Rowland and Jeffrey's points as well, and I can't stop thinking about, does that make me more of a Star Trek fan than a Star Wars fan? Because I want a future of abundance, but I really like Star Wars.
Yeah, they're both good television.
Okay, all right, okay, thank you. I just want to have that acceptance. But I believe that with every technology advance, and this is what Rowland made me think of, with every technological advance, there is a double-edged sword, right? Cell phones are amazing. You can connect with people anywhere, anytime, in the middle of nowhere. But cell phones are awful because people are looking at them constantly instead of looking and talking to each other. So any technology, pick one, right? You could pick, maybe not, I can't think of it right now, but the invention of, the cures for disease, they tend not to have downsides. But every other technological advances typically has two sides. You can identify the Star Trek-ish and the Star Wars-ish, right? The dystopian and the utopian use case for those technologies. And so the word that jumps out at me in terms of what we're looking at here with 2030 and beyond is collaborative. And yes, it could be collaborative between humans, and I'm going to take advantage of my strengths to help you, and you're going to offer up your strengths to help me, and we will collaborate to create a better vision for the future. But I also think within that word collaborate, we can collaborate with artificial intelligence. And so I can become better or faster at the things I'm good at and help you even more because of my collaboration with this augmented intelligence. And so I think that's an aspect of it. I think everything is going to get smaller and more mobile. I think we'll see a lot more wearables. We already are. And so again, you have the opportunity for doing good or evil with wearables and violating privacy or honoring privacy, just as we could with any other technological device. And so I would like to think of this collaborative vision being collaborative between humans, but also between the artificial partners we've created, and anywhere, anytime, even more so than the mobile phone has allowed us. It could be on your ear, it could be on your head, it could be over your eye, it could be on your wrist, anywhere that Apple has come up with a product that you could put almost anywhere to support your learning, and many other companies are doing something similar. I think we'll see that as well. And I don't think that nanotechnology is knocked out just yet. I think that's also still something that will transform our future in 2030 and beyond.
So it's hard to think Star Trek when we're living in Star Wars, but there is hope. So I feel like, so Native American communities are often strong adopters when they get access, but typically they get access late. So, education, the kids will probably get access to AI at school before it ever gets to the reservation in a robust format, things like that. So it's usually the youth training the adults on the next technology in Indian country, and we get a lot of pushback from cultural leaders. Had huge pushback 25 years ago on the internet. Like getting access to the internet was very suspect. There's a lot of criminality on the internet and pitfalls, etc. Still are today. You just got to know where to walk, right? And so it didn't take too long before those cultural leaders were calling up and asking for more bandwidth and how do we get more widespread opportunity throughout the reservation because our kids are needing these things. So it really, the lowest common denominator comes down to the youth and the use of the technology for the youth. So what does that future look like in Indian country? And I think as we see networks being built on reservations now and in the next 3 to 4 years, having a hopefully the majority of tribes will have some sort of communications network to the home. I think we're seeing the development of individuals and the growth of individuals in this digital platform where they didn't have this access or this world to live in. So there will be a lot of really creative ideas. There will be a lot of art. There will be a lot of sort of online culture and things like that that start to take place that are going to be coming from Native American communities.
We came up with these questions a while ago, and I think one of the answers I see to this first question is what our keynote started with yesterday. I think that stuff that was talked about at opening keynote, if that was able to trickle its way into K-12, and our K-12 students had access to that information and access to technology that could clarify the questions for them, much like a teacher does. But it's really hard for a teacher to clarify for 30 kids all at once. But have that and link that and have that trickle down to the K-12. I mean, because it's like we want all of our kids to be experts, right? And I love that line yesterday. It was like if you only become an expert when you experience things. And that was what my big takeaway yesterday was, which is like, okay, if all of our schools had broadband, all our K-12, they could participate in the things that were talked about yesterday in the opening keynote. So, which leads me to the second question. Our second question, which relates to another sci-fi, or I don't know, this is Marvel Universe. What Iron Man tech could students have access to? And
I'm passing on that one.
Yeah,
maybe
that's
not
a soft
Iron Man.
pass for me too.
And I'll set this up on I will LA Unified in K-12 has done it. They were the first ones to put iPads out, for good or for bad. They did iPads and they tried it. They've tried the chatbots, for good or for bad chatbots, and not to go too much into the pop culture, but that show online. And my wife always teases me because I'm a tech person. The show The Rookie, she loves the guy Nathan whatever because. Anyways, Firefly, another sci-fi thing, but they had this chatbot on a while ago that was telling girls to go harm another girl, and so it was that whole conversation, right? And then most recently, the chatbot came back and was helping them solve crimes. So there's good and bad, but I'm like, I think about a chatbot. It's in reality kind of Jarvis. Hey Jarvis, do this, do that, or the other thing. What could that look like positively, potentially in schools? Because you need broadband to access that. But, what do we think? What could Iron Man tech or not? But what could be something that be like a chatbot be used?
So I'll not pass on the Iron Man tech. I'm
Go
done
for
with
it.
Iron Man tech. So we're gonna see some opportunities where you're gonna get some creativity involved, and the heads-up displays, some of the optics that are included in the Iron Man mask. Some of that scan for data, online access. I mean, with the Google Glass and the things like that, we already have sort of like pieces and parts of this, but it'll get perfected, and wearables, as you were talking about, will get more streamlined so that wearables can not be a hindrance. You won't be walking around with an Oculus so you can't see ahead of you. You can only see in your thing. You'll be able to see other things and then have interaction with that. So I think that part of the Iron Man tech is probably coming. And we have a lot of Native youth that are interested in prototyping ideas. So they're asking for 3D printers. They're asking for the opportunity to be able to develop things that they think they have ideas for patents and different things like that. So we're really interested. We're building a digital learning facility that'll have these features. We're really looking to see what kind of information and opportunity comes out of that.
So large language models operate in mysterious ways. Tom DeFonte very cagily sort of categorized it like, well, you train your dog, and when you say sit and the dog sits, that's what happens. But you have no idea what's going on in that dog's brain, right? You have absolutely no idea. And this, to me, was demonstrated last summer when I went to SIGGRAPH in the Emerging Technologies Pavilion. And I saw a young man from Caltech. His name is Luke Cottom. And Luke had some Duplo Legos and some Lego on his bench. And he was asking someone wearing augmented reality to follow instructions on how to put those Lego blocks together. And it was kind of a complicated little build. It wasn't immediately obvious, and people really struggled. And then he said, okay, put these glasses on. And they put on the AR glasses, and the AR glasses were capturing an image of where the Legos were at. It was sending that image back to an LLM that had an understanding of what the instructions were and where the learner was at. In other words, where their hands were and what they were doing. And then this LLM was giving that learner instructions on how to put the Legos together. Now, if you have been following traditional computer vision for very long, you know that what Luke was showing there was a very hard problem. It has a lot of latent space, and there's a lot of ways to put Legos together, right? It's a difficult problem for a traditional machine learning algorithm to tackle, but the LLM had no problem whatsoever. It immediately was able to understand the morphology of those Legos. It could access a lot of information that other algorithmic approaches to this problem wouldn't have access to, and it was able to give, through the glasses, a prompt to the person putting the Legos together how to successfully succeed at that task. Now for me, I'm looking at that and thinking, oh my gosh, the possibilities are endless. You could give that to somebody on a naval aircraft carrier and tell them how to fix a machine. You could give it to somebody on an industrial production line and teach them how to put together a vending machine. You could give it to a student who needs to learn how to do surgery in a medical school. There are so many applications to that. It was as wonderful to me as the first time I asked my dog to sit, and he sat. So I think, for me, there are things that we can't even possibly imagine that this tool will be used for. Problems that were hard and difficult in the past will present themselves in ways through the lens of artificial intelligence in ways that seem almost magical.
I agree. I was going to throw out one more piece of intellectual property. The Diamond Age is another classic sci-fi novel, cyberpunk novel, and I keep thinking of it because we have, if you don't know, it's a novel in which a young girl in the story is given an AI tutor, effectively, is what we would have called it, but it's in the shape of a book. And as she looks at the book and reads the book, it teaches her in an increasingly difficult, scaled approach the proximal zone of development, as educators know.
Vygotsky.
And yeah, exactly. And walks her through everything she needs to know to be a civilized and intelligent woman. In any case, I'll throw that out because we're doing a lot of talking around it, and I just wanted to throw that sci-fi classic out there for those of you that have maybe not read it. It's a good read now, especially more than ever. But I'll tell you one thing that is exciting that you mentioned is that students are out there creating things and potentially inventing things that we can't imagine, as you said. I'll tell you one that I read about a few years ago is that we have the technology. This is very easy to do. And scientists have found out that our brain can handle many more senses than we have. So sight, vision, hearing, touch, all those. But we can also have a sense of direction. Some people have it innately. Some of the people in my life do not. But you could have a belt, and you have that belt and you put it on, and that belt could vibrate when you're facing north. They've invented it. It exists. It's out there. It doesn't take a lot of energy or power. It's certainly not too tricky to build. That's easy. That's an easy thing. And that's sort of an Iron Man tech, to go back to the original question, that it gives you additional information on your world that as a normal human you wouldn't have necessarily unless you know what to look for and get the cues from nature. But if you're in a building like this and you didn't know how you got here, it might be tricky to figure out which way's north, but the belt would tell you as you move. So your point about patents, I love that, because I was in a conversation at Spring Q a couple weeks ago, and we were talking about assessment. Yes, that super sexy thing, students taking high stakes testing with multiple choice on a day that maybe they didn't eat breakfast that morning or couldn't get sleep last night. But that's how we evaluate them and the school. And I've never been happy with the way that assessments are assessing. And they've never, oh, by the way, assessed the tools that companies have told us, colleges have told us, we are looking for these skills, these capabilities in students. Do we test for that with those assessments? No. Okay, end of rant. What if we did instead an assessment where we were measuring really valuable skills like creativity or invention or innovation? What if it was measuring the number of patents that this school had their students actually get validated and are now in the system? And that was a way you could measure their skill. How many apps are in the App Store that were invented by students at the school? How many research projects had been conducted by students with legitimate researchers out there as they're a student researcher? And how many published documents? You know, there's so many other alternative assessments we could be looking at to come out with some sort of innovation index that we could then start building the case within our society to ask those questions. What's their innovation index number? Not how well did the students do on a penciled-in multiple choice question test. So I realize it's a problem with two halves, right? Because one feeds the other. If you didn't have soccer moms, sorry, I'm married to one, soccer moms on the side of the field talking about, well, my school got this score, and what's your school have? That's where that starts, right? I feel like that's the conversation, and it happens with dads as well. I'm not picking on moms. It happens with society. How do we give them something else to talk about? How do we give them some other way of measuring schools that's a bit better for the students at the end of the day, to feed into colleges and their eventual workplace? So that conversation, I'm still thinking about a couple of weeks later, that what could we be assessing our students, leveraging Iron Man tech, to get back to the question, to really help them prepare for a future that is uncertain and not necessarily going to be confronting them with multiple choice questions.
I'll just share something that happened to me at one of the first schools that I was teaching at. And I'm going to go back to the dark ages here. It was a year-round school, and it was in Watsonville, California, which is a big growers area. And back then we had regular migrant students, because of the crops they were growing, that they bring the parents, or the parents would bring the kids up in March, and they would go home in late October, November. And they loved the year round because the kids got the education. So I remember in the teacher's room one day, this teacher came in and was so frustrated because this kid was doing math the wrong way. And I said, "What do you mean the wrong way?" And she said, "Well, he was coming up with answers, but I'm sure he was cheating." And I said, "Well, tell me what he was doing." He said, "Well, I'd write it up like 250 times 87, and he'd have the number like that. And he was using his fingers to do it. And she made him sit on his fingers end and wouldn't allow him to do it." I went nuts. I said, "You know, he's probably got a better way to do multiplication than any of us will ever figure out." And that's lived with me my whole life, that if we look to the students, and I saw this when we put on, computers, the internet, everything else, they will be our leaders and can help lead the class. And that's scary for a lot of teachers. So I think we need to, handle that fear factor that's out there. But boy, for those teachers that are going to embrace us, I mean, they're taking off to infinity and beyond.
That's good. Our next question was going to be slightly different, so I'm going to rephrase it, so hopefully you all roll with me. The Cenic conference happens every other year, right? So 10 years from now, it'll be 2036, right? So 5 conferences from now. Geoff represents higher ed, Matt represents the tribal communities and schools, and Mike, you and Rowland are in K-12. If we were to show up at a conference session, at the Cenic conference, we put in a conference session that showed we did it, we're done, broadband's done, and the title of the conference session was, not 2030 and beyond, but it's like, we're going to put in a session that says we did it. what would our title of our conference session be, and what would we talk about? Sorry, throwing you a curveball.
I
but
feel
you're
like,
saying 10
I
years
feel
from now,
like as the conference program chair, I'm being personally attacked here.
I'm just like, what would we want it to be? I mean, because I was thinking about it. I mean, the question we had posed was a newspaper title, but honestly, are newspapers going to be around 10 years from now? I'm stalling so they can think. You know, but a conference session is something real. So I mean, you know, I think about it like, what would be? You know, broadband's done. Kids are doing great things. You know, K-12. I mean, what would my conference session be like that I would be able to come and share with all of you? That would be interesting to this community, so you know what K-12 is doing with their broadband connection.
So I think it'd be great to have that as a title, talking about all the things you finished, you know, and then say, we're done. And then right underneath it, we're screwed. So I think that's, you know,
I know there's some people, I don't believe that, but yeah, there are a lot of people do. It's like, yeah,
well,
no,
no, I'm not saying we don't need to have
Yeah,
those
okay.
goals, but I don't think we can stop.
Yeah, no, that's
I mean,
good.
that's
Good point.
where I wanted to go there. It's not, I don't know about you, we're always going to need teachers. We're always going to need doctors. We're always going to need all these jobs. How skilled they are is up to us. And that's our job, to help look at the tools and tell that doctor, here's an assistant that you might want to look for these rare cases when this heart valve goes out, and look what they're doing in some other areas. So to me, I don't think we ever stop learning on this.
So maybe it's more we won instead of we done.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah,
So I can imagine a conference session entitled "The New Age of Assessment," and if you have your own personal digital tutor, somewhat like the Diamond Age, where you have access to excellent structured pedagogy, right? This agent knows how to teach you. You have access to the entire corpus of human knowledge. You understand your environment, so you're employing the OODA loop, sense, decide, act. This new age of assessment is actually no assessment at all. Because just like an expert teacher knows exactly where their students are in their epistemological journey, so does your personalized agentic tutor. So rather than having a point-in-time measurement, you have a heuristic about where you are and where you're going. And if your agent knows what your educational goals are, either set by yourself or set by your profession or your parents, I think that this age of assessment, this age of standardized tests or uniform tests may be coming to a close.
I think if we actually get to say that we're done, I think the teaching environment evolves from being a step-by-step sort of process teacher, which is probably going to come from the technology, to more of a social guidance counselor. How to behave in this technological world, how to almost even like a therapist, where you're helping manage that person's person rather than their education process. The education process seems to be, if we go to that route, would seem to be folded into the everyday of this person, and they would be followed around by technology, and things would all constantly be fed to them and structured and things like that, and they might need to rely on a person to know how to behave at that point.
Would that be what we called in the 80s instructional methods to individualize with each student's learning?
Yes.
I mean, it's not, and so once again, that cycle continues. And as we get these tools, we're going to get, and the kids are going to get better and better education.
What do you think, Mike? Nothing?
Well, I mean, they covered a lot of what I would have said. I would add that included in what you were just describing is the whole child. You're not just thinking about their math skill or their ability to use the spoken word or the written word. You're talking about the whole child and their personality and their skills and their aptitudes. and how that displays as what we would have called skills that would be measurable by a test isn't necessarily separated out anymore. There is no assessment. They are demonstrating those day in and day out, and you have some tool or technology or capabilities that you know what the best path for them would be. More importantly, they know where they should be going, what they should try out next. So I like the idea that it's the end of assessment. That would be the end of it. I feel like, I've already kind of covered my answer with that, but we'll come back to one phrase that was in my mind years ago. We were trying to vision out where to go as a nonprofit. And the point was raised, like Geoff and Rowland mentioned, that we could get to a point where we work ourselves out of a job. If our job is defined as we're here to help teachers integrate technology and make sure that students are aware of it, there could be an end if you defined it as narrowly as that. So we were trying to make sure that we were not defining our role as educators in that way, that narrowly. And so we redefined ourselves as permanent explorers. And so I continue to carry that idea in my head that there is the infinite horizon that we're going towards. There will always be technology that comes in that's new, and it will have the pro and the con, the utopia and the dystopia side, and who can guide us into that transition? These permanent explorers, these folks that are a little bit ahead perhaps in how to view technology and can coach the rest of us. And who's to say that they couldn't themselves be coached by artificial intelligence or augmented intelligence, and the students that are learning from them couldn't have necessarily that personal tutor as well to help understand, this new shift that we now have. Let's say we have, the planet is blanketed in wireless technology, or we've got, infinite power because we've harnessed the wind and solar and all these other tools. And so power is no longer a defining limitation, and we're not poisoning the planet by generating power. So some of those futures start to come into play. That will create new challenges that we need permanent explorers to help us figure out the answer to. And we got to grow them ourselves and train them with the tools we have available now for that unforeseen future.
And I want to just say one more thing about this vision of the future. It often focuses on individualized learning, right? Going back to the reboot of Star Trek some years ago, and they showed young Spock, and young Spock was in the academy, and he was being trained, and he had a little pod, and all around him were images and numbers and things coming up, and he was in his own little pod, and he succeeded or failed on his own. And that's not the way humans learn. Granted, he's a Vulcan, half Vulcan. We learn in groups, right? We learn around the campfire, telling stories. We learn by teaching each other. Some of the most effective learning that we do is from our peer group. So I don't think that we should envision a future where everyone is on their own epistemological journey with their own agency over that. I think we need to keep what really works now, things like active learning classrooms and dare I say it, group projects, and these other best in breed things that we already know how to do really well, and just do them better with this augmented reality that we're going to be living in.
You actually led right into the next question
that
really,
was on
really well,
purpose,
which was on purpose. It is 2035, and students are in university, students are in K-12, students are in here. What does school look like? You kind of already answered that. Does it look like Star Trek, like that, or Jetsons? Another reference. What tools do students have? We've mentioned a few of them. What learning opportunities do they have? And if we have time here, we'll see. I don't know if we do. We'll keep on track. But I'll also be curious to hear what you think. What tools? They have broadband. They've got we don't know what the tools will be, but what tools could be potential, but they have the connectivity. We know that. And what do you think? What could 2035 look like for a kid going to school tomorrow, or a student?
I think that, they'll have all the tools, they'll have all the connectivity, everything will be seamless. It'll be social training. It honestly will be getting kids together, learning to interact with one another, learning how to behave as a group, how to behave as an individual within a group. It's really going to be social skills. Otherwise, they're going to have all the rest of it at their fingertips. So the being part of a society, being part of groups, being part of collaborative efforts is going to be really relevant. Otherwise, we're going to have a bunch of mindless automatons.
I think it's still going to be a physical space, right? 2035 isn't that far away.
No.
Your kids are still going to be, your children might go to the same school that you went to if you still live in your hometown. So I think whatever technology that we might employ in that space has to be adaptive to the physical space. I don't think we're going to create whole new academies in 9 years, unless I'm really wrong. So whatever the technology is, it's got to integrate with the physical space. So I think that's going to be a constraint in some ways, because budgets, especially in education, aren't unlimited. But I think there will be inflection points where the technology really makes a difference. It'll be around display technology and interactive techniques and additive manufacturing. I think will be, maker spaces will bloom, I think.
You brought up such a good point, the difference in facilities. And Matt, it breaks my heart to hear there are still tribal areas that don't have good connections. So I just want to say it's up to us to have that vision of where we want to get our college, our students, our district, our school to go. And one time I spoke to the school board and had this person that wasn't very visionary, and he said, well, I don't think we need to put any money towards technology. And I remember I looked at him and I said, okay, do you want to be the one that tells our high school parents there's going to be no exposure to technology when they're getting ready for college?
Replace that guy with AI.
Yeah, and that's where I'm going. So, once again, you need to be an advocate, because some people can't do the translation that you guys are gifted with, and that's why you're here. So be that person that can take it, break it down, and figure out the direction. And when you say vision, man, it's going to differ for each facility, each tribal land, but advocate.
I would just add that I go back to the storytelling point that Jeffrey, who spells it correctly,
Absolutely.
made. That I think it's storytelling. I think it's connecting those communities, right? I would want my grandchildren to, hopefully they'll be around in 2035 by then, because it's only 9 years away, and 23-year-olds.
No pressure.
No pressure on my children if they're watching the live stream. In any case, my grandchildren, I would want them to connect with tribal communities. I want them to connect with people around the world. And we already do this with video conferencing. We already do this, we've done this for decades. But imagine some of the points you made about interactive technologies and the ability for them to have those conversations. We did a project in like 04, 05 called Rock Our World, and it would be where when Apple released GarageBand, and we would send a song around the world, literally, and it would just be files, and the students would add a drum track in Malaysia, and then they would go and send it off to another country, and they would add vocals, and they would have conversations about their culture and their society from just the simple exchange of creating something together and building a story that they'll remember. So that's really low tech, right? We're 22 years beyond that. Imagine 2035 where we'll be with the potential of collaborative building. So let's have students from around the world try to solve some of these really sticky problems that we're leaving them with, and give them the capacity and the tools and the resources, so that there are certainly going to still be physical buildings in 2035, but they would then necessarily not be limiting. They wouldn't necessarily be tied to just brick and mortar experiences for those students. They'd be able to apply their learning immediately to a future career. They'd tell stories together collaboratively with students from around the world and adults around the world. I think another piece that I don't think will be there in 2035, but multi-age learning. I don't know why we still are addicted to the idea of seat time, and that Rowland may figure something out in 3 weeks that it takes me 3 months to learn, but he's going to have to sit next to me in that class for all 10 months. Doesn't matter if he got it in 3 weeks and I got it much longer. So how do we adjust away from this industrialized system that we're still attached to, and open it up so that it isn't necessarily grade-based promotion, age-based promotion, but Rowland may be far advanced at the same age as I am in math, and we have adjusted that. We've figured out a way, leveraging technology and solutions and the whole child, to make sure that I'm advancing ahead in skills that I'm really good at, and maybe Rowland doesn't have as much skill in. And so knocking down some of these these preconceptions that we've continued forward because of an industrial model of education, and moving away from that so that we could serve that whole child and do the best for them. Again, I don't think we'll be there in 2035, maybe 2050, but.
So I wanted to just tie back into the tribal space. Native Americans are, they tell stories. It's very oral tradition, learning process. It's gathering based. It's based around food. A lot of the times, it's always based around music, and coming together as a family or coming together as a community. So I'm really curious to see where this technology at 2035 integrates into that sort of lifestyle and cultural lifestyle. How have the tribes embraced those technologies to enhance that process, and or have they left that out of the process, which it might detract from the process? So I'm not exactly sure where we're headed, but I do know that tribes are starting to learn when they're losing their language. The oral traditional ways of teaching their children isn't working anymore because the children now learn on screens. And so the kids are adapting this process. I'm learning, I'm on a screen. So now those linguists and such are creating programs and apps and things to engage the kids in the environment that now understand how to learn in. And that's starting to increase the language absorption. So I'm really curious to see how it plays into the cultural and the music and there's the foundation of these communities.
I'm hoping in the future that there is a mutual exchange between technology and culture. There's some people in the audience that know my history, and among some of my experiences is working with this group called Cenic. And that was a really interesting mix of artists and engineers and theorists. And we use the technology to advance our culture. And I hope that that's in the future for folks in the tribal community, other indigenous people around the world, that they aren't subsumed by this monolithic technology culture, but rather find ways to use the culture to enhance what makes them themselves, what makes them, unique. I was at a workshop a couple years ago, sponsored by the NSF, about unlocking indigenous knowledge and informing Western science by non-Western science means. And for me, this was an eye-opening experience, moving beyond the quantitative and into other forms of scholarly understanding, other forms of technology that were non-Western, but were led by indigenous people. So I'm hoping that the technology of the future centers those indigenous experiences and those indigenous people in a way that I don't observe it doing yet.
Well, I know it says we have 2 minutes there, but I see we're 2 minutes over, so I'll wrap it up if that's okay, because I know and appreciate all of you. I think the bottom line is, technology and infrastructure, that by itself doesn't change education. Technology and infrastructure gives possibility, though. And right now we're almost to the point where we have the chance to have California have them. We've done California how good it is. We can have the best, most connected classrooms. We can have the most collaborative classrooms that are innovative. And then what we do with it, though, is up to the folks in this room who are the educators, who support the educators, to see what the students do. Because, if it turns out Star Wars, Star Trek, it's because we let it there. And I like both movies too. So any last thoughts from the group? But I appreciate your chance to be here. Last minute.
Live long and prosper, and may the force be with you.
There you go. And please.
And I have friends everywhere.
Thank you.